bargaining with the BCTF simply reflects the cynicism and dishonesty that has come to permeate the relationship between the parties involved. Bill 22 will neither improve BC's education system, nor will it address the fundamental and deeply entrenched problems inherent in the current collective bargaining structure in that system. But before I offer what I hope will be seen as a constructive alternative, I have some declarations to make, Madam Speaker. First, I declare my unequivocal support for teachers and the teaching profession. Teaching is an avocation, or as Commissioner Don Wright suggested in his 2004 report on teacher collective bargaining, it is a moral calling. Commissioner Wright also pointed out that teaching involves creating magic in the classroom and warned the government in 2004 that decades of dysfunctionality at the bargaining table was eroding that magic. A warning that has been repeated in one form or another by every fact finder, commissioner, and industrial inquiry that has examined the K-12 collective bargaining system in this province for over the past 3 decades. We've turned a deaf ear to this demand for fundamental systemic reform for far too long. Bill 22 does not restore the magic to our classrooms. On the contrary, it will only add to the dysfunctionality, and that's why it must not be supported if we truly want to get at root causes, begin the process of healing relationships, and ensure BC has the finest education system possible, not in rhetoric, but in fact. Now, I'm not naively suggesting that every teacher is called or every teacher can create magic. Just as there are individuals who are credentialed as lawyers or doctors or nurses or plumbers or electricians or have been elected as MLAs who should not be in those positions, there will be people in the teaching profession who ought not to be in the classroom. But as in other professions, those people are by far in the minority and generally weeded out by the nature of the job. However, I have long believed it is essential that our education system have a strong, consistent, and structured teacher evaluation and mentorship program to ensure that every teacher in every classroom is capable of creating positive learning environments for every student. So I empathize with the government and BCPC's attempts to put such a system in place. But this should not be done by fiat through presumptive terms of reference for a minister-appointed mediator, as much as it needs to be done. As a society, we demand an awful lot from our teachers. The government's own new education plan recognizes this when it states, and I quote, "A great teacher has always been the key to creating outstanding educational experiences." So if the magic is indeed going out of BC's classrooms, then the blame needs to be placed on those who are not adequately resourcing our system and not the teachers who, I believe, are doing jobs that most people could not do day in, day out. I warrant that most MLAs in this House would not last a week in a classroom in today's schools. Again, except those that have been there. Again, the government's new education plan recognizes the need for government to provide teachers with the supports they require to be guides, mentors, coaches, and content experts. But once again, this year's budget and Bill 22 will further erode the supports government provides to teachers while reserving the right to ask teachers to do so much more in their classrooms. My second declaration, Madam Speaker, is that I'm very fond of one teacher in particular. In the spirit of full disclosure, I declare that my wife, partner, and friend of 30 years is one of those teachers who will be impacted by the content of Bill 22. My wife, Trish, and her teaching partner, Teresa McCart, are 2 of those teachers who create magic in their classroom to the benefit of their students and society as a whole. That's not my assessment, Madam Speaker, of their contribution. It is the assessment of anyone who has had the privilege of spending time in their classroom. A classroom that has 27 students, 4 of whom are designated as having special needs, 1 who is an ESL student with no ESL specialist support in the district, 4 or 5 more who are in the process of testing and may in all likelihood be designated. Despite this mix of needs, these 2 teachers will create magic, still create magic, a testament to the willingness of teachers to do the very thing the minister claims needs to be imposed on the system by Bill 22. With its removal of the soft quota of 3 special needs students per class. What Bill 22 really does is remove the right of classroom teachers to be consulted and collaborated with in the determination of their class composition. It removes their right to negotiate the resources needed to add children with special learning needs to their class. And it also removes the classroom teacher's say in whether their class will exceed the now soft target of 30 students in grade 4 to 12. I will have more to say about the legal implications of Bill 22 shortly, but Bill 22's change in classroom size and composition will also directly impact the working conditions of teachers, a right the BC Supreme Court clearly stated is a collective bargaining right. This portion of Bill 22, despite the government's moralistic rhetoric, is in my assessment about cost savings and efficiencies of scale, not about treating every child equally. What the minister fails to take into account in his example of a high-functioning student in a wheelchair having the right to be the 30th student in a grade 4 to 12 class is that his argument and this bill will also allow a low-functioning, high-needs designated student to be added to that same class without the resources needed to ensure that not only will that student have the best chance for success, but that teacher will be able to create a positive learning experience for every other child in that class, designated or not. What the Minister of Education also fails to take into account in his argument for this portion of the bill is that as a result of decades of consistent underfunding, few resources exist to support the classroom teachers' efforts to support special needs designated children in their classroom. There are too few diagnosticians, occupational therapists, speech and language pathologists, teachers for the deaf and blind, ESL specialists, social workers, counselors, and the list goes on. In some districts, many of these essential supports simply do not exist because of persistent lack of funding. If the classroom teacher is not fully supported with professional advice and expertise, how can we expect them to fully support every student? The Minister of Education made the argument in his speech on this bill that as a first principle, every child should have access to every classroom regardless of their designation. I agree with that first principle, but it must be matched with another first principle. Every child designated needing support for their learning must be fully resourced in every classroom they are in. Teachers all over this province already accommodate designated children beyond the soft quota of 3. There is no need to remove their right to consultation to achieve this objective. In the few instances where teachers might resist exceeding this soft quota, I'm convinced those teachers are doing so for sound classroom management and learning environment reasons and not because they don't want another so-called designated child in their class. The minister didn't give MLAs an indication that we have a situation where we are not allowing designated children into classrooms. So as legislators, we've had no hard data presented to us to suggest that the government has justification for its decision to once again impose class size and composition configurations by legislation outside of the collective bargaining process. It makes me wonder if the government truly understands why it lost the Supreme Court case on Bill 28. The minister says he's following the government's lawyers' advice on this matter. I wonder if these are the same lawyers who advised the government that Bill 28 was constitutional. My third declaration is that I am a former teacher and science department head. Why does that feel like I'm making a declaration at an AA meeting, Madam Speaker? I taught high school for 7 years. In my first year, I taught special needs math and special needs science, segregated classes for designated students. In my time as a teacher, I experienced the beginning of the integration process the minister now states requires rethinking. I was asked to modify science curriculum for special needs designated children in my Science 8, 9, and 10 classes. Something, Madam Speaker, I had been given absolutely no training to do. I also flat out rejected the integration of designated students into my Biology 11 class for 2 reasons. First, I did not feel the particular designated students who were assigned to that class would gain educationally from being in that particular class. And second, I believe that attempting to modify that curriculum and to teach to that one student would undermine my ability as a classroom teacher to create a positive and successful environment for the rest of the students in that class who my new from experience would struggle with that curriculum already. So when I say there must be a first principle that designated students and their teachers be fully resourced to ensure the success of every child in every classroom, I say it from direct experience with this very complex and very sensitive pedagogical issue, not political issue, Madam Speaker. As a science department head, I also had direct experience with underfunding of the education system and the imposition of education reform. I oversaw the reduction in classroom experiments and direct experiences with nature for students due to budget cuts under both social credit and NDP governments. As science department head and classroom teacher, I also had to figure out how to institute the NDP's attempt at comprehensive education reform without consultation and without the additional resources needed to ensure that reform would be successful. What's that phrase, Madam Speaker, about those who do not learn from history? The current government's attempt at education reform will go the way of the dodo bird, just like the NDPs did, unless they can find a different and more productive way to engage all teachers more directly in that reform effort. Which brings me to my fourth and final declaration. I have never been a fan of the BC Teachers Federation. Under the social credit in the late 1980s, I argued for professional association as opposed to the unionization of the teaching profession. I worried that under the BCTF, as a union and political activist mindset would creep into the leadership function of my chosen profession. That seniority would trump qualifications for filling positions. Teacher evaluation would be seen as progressive discipline under a collective agreement rather than as an opportunity for ongoing professional development. So again, I find myself empathizing with the employer's demands in this current dispute, and again reiterate that that is no excuse to resort to legislation to get that. I also argued that students were not widgets in a factory that would not be hurt in the event of a strike. I was vocal in expressing my concern that exercising our newly earned right to strike and the inflamed emotions that invariably surround strikes would not provide the right role models for students. I even crossed the picket line during an illegal strike. I'm sure some of you can imagine the abuse I took as a result. I lost some friends over that, Madam Speaker. It didn't matter that the strike was illegal. I was simply supposed to suspend my duty to obey in order to support the union's displeasure with the government of the day. It was not a collective bargaining strike, Madam Speaker, it was a political strike. So I find it hard to swallow all of the BCTF's woe is us rhetoric and its use of the term bullying to characterize the government's actions. The BCTF's own behavior during the most recent strike of its own support workers suggests a great deal of hypocrisy exists in the leadership of this organization. The BCTF locked out its own workers for working to rule. It refused to participate in real mediation and claimed that organization's fiscal realities gave it the right to attempt to unilaterally strip the CEP of portions of its collective agreement. Sound familiar, Madam Speaker? Maybe the CEP should wear pink the next time they approach the bargaining table with the BCTF. Joking aside, Madam Speaker, I do find it, and this is very serious, I find it unfortunate that the symbol of the anti-bullying campaign is being co-opted in this dispute. BC's anti-bullying campaign is slowly but surely having success in dealing with real bullying in our schools. And I urge the BCTF and anyone associated with this week's strike action to stop tainting this campaign by using its symbols for political reasons. I also urge teachers individually and collectively to look at the current structure and direction of the BCTF and to do some soul searching about the organization's role in the dysfunctionality of the collective bargaining process in BC. It is simply not accurate to suggest the government or BCPC owns all of the blame for the soured relationships between the parties involved in this dispute. Having articulated my personal struggles with the BCTF, I must emphasize, however, that I do not believe the weaknesses of the BCTF gives the government the right to strip teachers of their constitutionally guaranteed right to collective bargaining for their working conditions. And that's what I believe the government is attempting to do in Bill 22. appointing a mediator by government fiat with the terms of reference that reflects the government's agenda, giving the mediator the legal ability to compel BCTF to participate in the process, imposing obscenely punitive fines on both individual teachers and the BCTF, and once again legislating class size and composition rather than bargaining for it is, quite simply, Madam Speaker, an abuse of legislative power. The Minister has indicated this bill will likely be subject to a court challenge. Based on my layman's reading of the Supreme Court decision, I believe that portions of this bill, like 28, will be struck down. I cannot understand how the Minister can come to the conclusion that this bill meets the spirit and intent of Justice Griffin's direction to the government. Bill 22 will also lead to the imposition of a collective agreement with the teachers, one that will not address the spirit and intent of Justice Griffin's decision. As the government directly states in Bill 22, it will not restore collective bargaining rights on class size and composition until the next round of negotiations. Madam Speaker, I'll be curious to see how the government's lawyers will rationalize that sleight of hand when they stand before Justice Griffin again. Just as importantly, Bill 22 does nothing to address either the current labor dispute or the systemic problems with collective bargaining in the education system. It does not and will not, in the words of Commissioner Don Wright, lead to mature collective bargaining for BC's K-12 system. As Commissioner Wright and many others have pointed out, a key reason we do not have a mature collective bargaining system for teachers in BC is because of the attitudes and entrenched positions of all parties involved. As Mr. Wright pointed out, the state of collective bargaining in BC's K-12 system will not be improved until, quote, unless there is an attitudinal and behavioral change on both sides. The BC